Podcasters Roundtable round 162. Is it a podcast or is this just live? So we've talked about live before here, but I am curious. There have been, a couple new platforms have come on the scene probably since we've done that. So we will get into that, and I think one of our stories has something to do with that as well. But do you even care about live streaming as a podcaster? Do you do it? We are coincidentally doing a podcast right now that we are live streaming, right? So let's get into that. Let's let's meet the roundtable. Co-host Dave Jackson, welcome back.
Ray, thanks for having me. This is very meta. It's a live stream about a podcast where we're going to talk about is live streaming a podcast. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we don't do topics anymore, so we're not going to talk much about it. Although whatever that first story is tends to go the first half. So if you're the lucky story who goes first, then you get a lot of play. So
that's it. See. But yes, Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
Awesome. And brand new roundtabler, John, welcome to your first roundtable.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. I'm John Chidgey. I sort of run the Engineered Network. It's a network, but it isn't. It's mainly just a place to put all my shows because I have too many podcasts, like so many podcasters. Too many.
He listens to Ray.
Yes, anyhow. But yes, most known for Causality and Pragmatic podcasts. So, but yes, thanks for having me on, guys. Been looking forward to this for quite a while. So thank you.
Awesome. And I think that John probably reached out to remind me that he was on the list, which is very helpful. So podcastersroundtable.com/guest if you want to be on a future roundtable. And that's where we pull from to get roundtablers most of the time. Sometimes I have to go out and recruit depending on what we're talking about. So we want to have as much expertise as possible, but you do not have to be an expert to be on the roundtable. The whole key to this show is that it is different perspectives from different podcasters at different stages in their podcast journey, right? So not every podcaster, most do not have a show about podcasting, but every podcaster knows a lot about their experience podcasting. That's what we want this audience to learn from. So join us, and podcastersroundtable.com/live is where we're doing this. And of course, we're on YouTube. So if you want to see, if you're just listening to this, which most of you will be, audio podcast, they won. They beat out the video podcast. YouTube killed the video podcast star. And we're on YouTube. So we give in. Check us out on YouTube. Also, Podcasters Roundtable. So I am having a frosty beverage made of beer, which I invite everyone to do, but it is BYOB, bring your own beverage, but it is like 9:30 in the morning wherever John is. So John, where are you coming from?
I'm in Brisbane, Australia, so on the east coast of Australia. So yeah, it's a beautiful Saturday morning. Really literally is a lovely morning out there. But so yeah, I'll be sticking to water for this one, but that's totally fine too. So
yes, that's what beverage we are keeping the international thing going, Dave. We have very successful rate of international contributors here, which I really enjoy, and it's rarely ever intentional.
It makes it sound so much smarter. That's the thing I love about it.
The accents, they help.
That's it.
All right. Well, you know what? Stories. I think John is the winner with 2 on here. We're thin on stories. Is it possible that we have the shortest roundtable ever? Don't count on it. But John, we have the chance to have a short roundtable. But who wants that? We're going to be gone for weeks. Let's just drag this out. Maybe we could break it up into part 4. You guys like doing podcasts as parts? So here, before we get to the first story, I'm already jumping off the tracks. Podcast as parts, right? You've seen that. I swear I've done it actually in the podcaster studio, had like an epically long conversation. And early on you think, oh, maybe it's a good idea to break this into part 1 and part 2. I don't know. Maybe it is. There's arguments for and against. John, have you ever done that with a show, with an episode?
I have. And the episode I had was episode 82 of Pragmatic. It was about Tesla. And I had Caleb Elston on from the Tesla show. And we talked for 4 hours straight. And out of, I think, respect for my listeners, I figured that's just way too long to stay on that topic. So I had to split it into 2 episodes. And it was interesting because I got a bit of a 50-50 split of people coming back saying, why'd you cut that off? I could have listened to that all in one go, and so on. But as many people also thank me. So I'm not entirely sure what the conclusion is on that. Is I think you can do it. I think it was the right call, but I got mixed messages from my audience. So I'm not entirely sold which was the better approach in the end. But yeah, I still stand by what I did, though, in that case.
Plant the flag. I stand by it. But Dave, what do you think about this? Because I think it's up in the air. It's a tough one.
I think in 4 hours, that's definitely something you're going to think about. What I hate is when somebody has a show that's normally, I don't know, a half hour, and they talk to somebody for an hour, and then they break it into 3 20-minute segments, because in addition to the 20-minute segments, you then have them reintroducing the guest again, and then doing their little snippet at the end where they're going to do their Jerry Springer what we learned today. And I was like, if you would cut out all those introductions and what I learned today, that really wouldn't have been that long of an interview. That's where I kind of go, I'm going to vote give it to me all in one shot. There's always the Dan Carlin hardcore history, but let's face it, Dan is a freak and creates incredible content. So when he's doing 6-hour shows, it's, but I'm trying to think. The only time I hate it is if a segment can't stand on its own. So if they get to the crescendo and they're like, hey, if you want to hear how this ends, tune in again next week, kids, and you're like, so, and then of course there's always the Valerie Geller, there is no such thing as too long, only too boring, line, but I don't know, 4 hours. I think it depends on your audience. I always go back to, Judy Graff did a show called Farm and Wife. Her first episode was 3 hours, and she gave it to me to kind of give it the once-o, and I go, Judy, this is 3 hours long. And she goes, yeah, I know. My audience is saying it's too short. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah. She goes, my audience is farmers. And when you see those guys out there and they're, going down these big giant rows and they're planting seed or whatever they're doing, she's like, a lot of those tractors drive themselves. That's why the rows are so straight. She goes, the guy that's actually driving is just sitting there to do the turns. She's like, so they're bored out of their gourd. And so they were sitting there listening to the podcast and like, hey, that was cool. You got another one? So, which I guess means the proverbial podcast answer, which is, of course, it depends.
So I think if you're thinking about it, because I would say my most successful episode, I mean, it's not science, I'm guessing, on the round table, not the round table. I don't know about, did we do a part 1, part 2? I don't think so. We might have. When we did that presentation that we did at whatever conference we were at with me, you, and Daniel, I feel like there was a part 2, I think. Anyways, on the Podcaster Studio, it was like some epically long conversation with an audio engineer about compression, and people loved it. And I know personally, as I'm listening, if the conversation's good and you pull the plug, oh man, especially if you probably should serve your most hardcore listeners, right? Your regular subscribers, because think about what happens when you do, they're probably in, right? John, as you said, that like some people said, I could have kept listening to that, right? And those are the people who are going to keep coming back. And so when you do that, those people listen when the podcast comes out. So when you say part 2's coming up, they really do have to wait like a full week for part 2, as opposed to a lot of people will catch it in the archive and it doesn't matter. It can go right to part 2. It's tough. And so I think probably having communication with your audience is probably best on this. And I'm sure some shows do this intentionally. I mean, honestly, there's like when I talk to my podcasters at work, what I try to get them to do is shorten the episode as opposed to like before we go in, right? And have a plan and don't, because you could do 4 hours or I mean, even like let's think 2 hours, and at the end of an hour you're on topic 3, but topic 3 and 4 were amazing content. It a lot of times probably didn't get heard. Obviously, you can see this in your retention stats, right? At least we have those now. That wasn't always a thing, right, Dave? We didn't always know like when people were dropping off unless they told us. Now you can see it. I mean, if you're losing the majority of your audience at 45 minutes or something, you kind of found out where you should be. And maybe that tells you if you're going to do, an hour and 45 minutes, you should split in 2, right? And then check those metrics. I think that's probably pretty good. And look, we're podcasters. We're making up as we go. All our audiences are different. So iterate, like figure it out and then change, I would say.
Yeah, I was interviewed on a show this week, and they had me booked from 7:30 to 9:30, and I emailed them. I go, "Is this really like 2 hours?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, I'll try to be entertaining for 2 hours. That's a long time to like,
That's
hello, my
another one.
baby." Yeah.
So consider those. Okay, let's throw those into it. You've got, if you're going to do interviews, right? Like you should probably not, especially ahead of time, that person should know what they're signing up for really early. Maybe in the first request, hey, I'd like to do an interview with you. It's 2 hours long. So you could at least say, yeah, I can't really do 2 hours, right? And it's just not going to work. I can do an hour or whatever, right? And then there's today's topic, live streaming. We are live. And this is the only time you hear me say, because I absolutely despise when I hear a podcaster say, well, we're going to need to wrap it up. We're about out of time. What time? What time are you out of? Like, you're a podcaster.
I agree.
Right? But in this scenario, you will hear me say that because I've asked an audience to be here. The expectation is that we're going to run an hour, and someone puts that into their schedule. And if I'm over an hour, they still want to listen, but they've already planned to do something else. So in that case, when it's live, and it's kind of like we might talk more about what's the difference between live and a podcast, I think there's a different consideration there for the audience. John, what do you think about all of these or any other factors that go into deciding?
Well, okay. So just holding on the interview one for a second, I'll just want to circle back quickly that all this conversation jogged my memory on the Tesla episode. I actually decided to release a merged, well, as originally recorded version for my patrons on Patreon. So I actually did do that.
It's like a DVD bonus. Like he threw it back to the DVD bonus content.
Yeah. Exactly. So as you were saying, it's like for the committed fans, the people that are really supporting the show, then I don't want to make them wait. So in the end, I actually did that. This is a few years ago, so I just blanked on that temporarily. So there's that. So I agree with that one for sure. On the interviewing side, I like what you were talking about, Dave. You had like a 2-hour block. I try and do the same thing when I'm interviewing, because I say interviewing. I have people on Pragmatic. It's not really an interview. It's just a conversation with someone who's more of an expert on the topic. And we just like compare notes and so on. But I'd always set that expectation up front, and I always ask for what's the end stop. The whole 4-hour thing was just a freak occurrence. We just kept talking and talking. It was great conversation, so I didn't want to stop. And lucky for me, nor did Caleb. So it was great. Fond memories of just recording that episode. It was fun.
And you shouldn't stop, because as a listener, I can tell when that happens. Right, again with the time limits, or I can tell even more so when an interviewer doesn't pay attention to the question. I'm like, how are you not following up with that amazing thing they just said? They're going to the next question on their list. Like, let the interview go where it's going to go. But you can tell when the interviewer is pulling the plug and you're like, it was so good. What are you doing? You just had the best interview with this person and you just let it go. Anyways, John, keep going.
Oh, no. I'm just simply with that. I didn't have too much else to add on that point. It's just that I always look at it this way. When I've got someone else's time, I have to respect their time limits. And I say to them, as soon as we dial, has anything changed? Do you have a hard stop? Let's talk about that straight up front. And if I have to reprioritize the content, and if there's questions or points we want to cover, then that's what I've got to do in real time. And that's just the way it goes. And it's painful when you got to pull the plug because they have to go.
Right.
I'll always allow extra time, but if I've got someone on who's really busy and getting their time is precious, so I have to respect their time, and it doesn't always work out. So it's painful when they got to leave, and it's a really good conversation. I'm like, okay, well, thank you.
Well, in the same way that podcasters remember their 1-star review, I remember the podcast, going back to Ray's thing. Somebody was interviewing Liz Covert, who does Ben Franklin's World, and she was going over the history of radio and how it's changed. And you start to see similarities between podcasting and radio. And the host was like, well, we're out of time. And I was like, it's a pod. I'm like screaming at my dashboard. It's a podcast. It's not like the midday person is coming in and we got to go for Kenny the Kid or something. I was like, you're killing me. And they're like, oh, we'll have her back. And then they never did.
So is Kenny the Kid a character, Dave, that I missed on the?
Kenny the Kid is actually a guy that was a DJ in Cleveland. It was really good, like so good that I would like set my alarm at 7:30 on Saturday nights. And of course, and here's what he did. You ready for this? He let people pick the songs. Like it was actually a request. It was from 7:30 to midnight, and it was so good that you guessed it, radio canned him.
I was going to say, you know what? As a kid, I always called in for the request. And then I was just convinced that they took the requests that were already on the list. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
actually a request.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I once requested Judas Priest, and they're like, "Yeah, we're not going to play that, but if you request Loverboy, we'll play that." And I was like, "Hey,
Notice I
Rock and
told you.
Rick, can I hear some Loverboy?" And they're like, "Working for the weekend." I was like, "Wow, okay, that's how that works." So
Well, I mean, let's admit it. As podcasters, most of us were just the kid who was recording, waiting to hear us request the song so we can hit the 2-button record and play.
that's it.
I'm gonna name my band "Record and Play." It's like wear my clothes backwards. That's an old joke. All right, I just made it up. Let's see. Liberty Dude says, "Your podcast is your art, an extension of you. Create your vision. If feedback makes sense, use it. If not, don't. Art will never please everyone. Don't try." And I would say definitely, because you know I'm talking about, ask your audience and get that feedback, but there will be the squeaky wheel, right? And you have to keep the silent majority in mind, right? So take everything with a grain of salt, evaluate the feedback. Does it make sense for the show, right? It's sure
That's the
people are going
key.
to have, yeah.
Because if somebody goes, "Hey, I want you to go in this direction," and you go, "Yeah, that's not really why I'm doing the podcast," there's a name for that person, and it is not your target audience. Like, I appreciate you listening, but that's not what we do here. Thank you.
It's
All
it's
right.
really hard. That's really hard to do when you're trying to figure out what your audience wants. The longer you do it, and the better you get to know your audience, the better you get at it. But when I started out, I did try a little bit of everything, including live streaming, which we're going to get to in a second as we live stream. Sorry, I just love that. Anyway, never mind. The point is that it's difficult because I've fallen into the squeaky wheel syndrome myself, and learned some hard lessons along the way. So
I almost
One-star
canceled
comment
his.
Dave was talking about.
Yeah.
You'll
I remember
that one.
mine is a bad commercial for a bad show. 1 star. I was like, I can quote that like it's scripture, but ask me to quote a 5-star, couldn't do it. But no, I had a woman complain about my podcast rodeo show, and I almost shut the whole thing down. And then I asked my audience, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" No, this is because I was like, sometimes I come across as kind of mean, and they're like, no, keep doing it. That's just one, like, don't pay no attention to the person crying behind the screen. It's like, she's fine. I was like, okay. So don't let that squeaky wheel be, too, it may be loud, but you need to check it for accuracy. Or like I said, in some cases, that's not your target audience.
And I think that, you can't quote the 5-star reviews because I think those come in and they're more like sighs of relief. You're like, oh, all right. People are enjoying it, right? As opposed to that one person who doesn't enjoy it. And also the comment's usually bad too, because it's just like, you suck. You're like, oh, I remember that. Like the nice review goes way into why they like it, which is the one you need to read and filter into your show and do more of. Like, hopefully you've done that, right? But I mean, yeah, shout out those when they come in, shout those out. Like, those are big. Those are big. Someone gives you their time to do that. And I mean, as a podcaster, we've probably read a review that was nice, and it's like, okay, I'm reaching people. This is working. This feels better than the bad stuff.
And save them if it came in like as a email. Make a folder or something somewhere to save those. So on those days when you're like, time to make the podcast, like, hold on, let's go read some of these and put some gas back in my tank.
I would honestly say the only reason this show keeps going is because sometimes it's we're not here. We're every 2 weeks, but sometimes. And when I'm able to show back up and then the guests come on and I meet new people, new experience, every time we end, I'm like, that's the reason. That pulls me back in every time. So the audience keeps it going, 100%. All right, let's get into one of the stories, John. Let's put the train back on the track. There is no track here, by the way. It's the round table, but we'll try.
All right. So I picked this one. It was like wherever you get your podcasts. It was on Amplify Media, but I got the link from Podcast Business Journal. And it talks a bit about the different platforms and platform providers and different missteps that they've taken, and how lots of little apps that have had lots of VC money poured into them just haven't taken off. They haven't succeeded in the longer term, and does a very light touch analysis on like exactly why they said that was the case. But for me, there were 2 takeaways. The sub takeaway, which relates to the live streaming, was that TuneIn tended to favor live audio, and I personally still don't understand the attraction of that, but that was cited as one of the reasons why they weren't as successful. And then they talked about different ones like podcast. sorry, Pocket Cast, sorry, and how it's been bounced across from NPR to Automatic, I think it is, and some of the other ones that have had lots of VC funding just haven't gone anywhere. And my observation was that ultimately larger platform providers like Spotify and Apple are tending to succeed. I would probably count YouTube because that's kind of like a balance, and maybe even TikTok maybe as well, but that's sort of fringe if we're coming at this from the traditional podcasting angle, which is predominantly audio first. So as audio first, I think the larger platform play just seems to be the one that is ultimately more sustainable, and a lot of these other ones are just falling by the wayside.
I see apps that are solving problems that don't exist. Like, oh, here's, this one, blah, blah, blah. Like I just heard there's another app that's coming out that's small snippets of audio. And I was like, do we not remember that, like, that's how Anchor started? It was little, like, 15 seconds, and TikTok now has gone to 10 minutes. I was like, how many times are we going to start off with a small snippet of something and then it goes up and blah blah blah? But like, I think Bullhorn is still around, and I know there's a feature that is different than any other app, but I couldn't tell you what it is. It's probably something to do with feedback or something like that with a name like Bullhorn. But I know they're around. They're probably VC funded. But, you have to, for me, I use Overcast. And the only thing that I have remotely ever thought about leaving Overcast for is Marco has come out and said, I'm not doing streaming Satoshis. I'm not doing the whole Bitcoin thing. Not going to do it. And I was like, that's a bummer, because that's the one feature. Like, I always tell people that are making those kind of apps where, newpodcastapps.com, I'm like, can you just make Overcast? Can you just recreate this? And some of them are getting close. And when they get close and they stream, then I'll be like, okay, there's the one feature I need that this app doesn't do that I now want to do over here. But and streaming Bitcoin is such a small percentage of people that even want to do that. But I think sometimes people make apps that are like, oh, this one allows you to do such and such. And I'm like, is anybody wanting that? So.
I think you're right about TuneIn. In that case, it was pretty, that the live audio was the brand. Like, you understood, I think if you understood what TuneIn was, you kind of understood that. It kind of felt like radio. For podcasters, for producers in the early days, it was the way to get in on, what was it, like Amazon, the Echo or something like that.
Yeah.
Early days. And I'm a lifetime Pocket Cast user. Absolutely love it. And the reason, I'm trying to remember why I went there in the first place, but it had the best UI early on. And so it hooked me early. And I think people tend to stick with the one that they find and is good enough. But it makes me wonder how much of it is, sort of network effect and being early, right? So Apple, obviously, like the first major podcast directory, right? To really have like that network effect, that massive audience that's already there. So that's naturally why people go there, and then they sort of stay there. People don't like change. They don't move. They don't move that often. Spotify, it made me think, if you're trying to compete with Google today, could you do it, right? So I started using Brave browser recently. I just need another browser, and I like it, but I think Brave browser is all about security, and the crypto plays into that a little bit too. So they're trying to find their niche, right? Because becoming something bigger than Google or even Safari or Firefox at this point is pretty hard. Now you could say, oh, Spotify came along late. They busted in. They're number 2, that number 2 has kind of always been up for the taking. Weirdly, it's just been sitting there. We remember the Zune. Microsoft had the chance to just lock that in. The number 2 was locked in by Zune, and then they, rip on RIP Zoom. So, or Zune. Got to be careful these days. Zoom is so synonymous. But how did they do it? Again, they already had such a massive built-in audience, and then they threw a lot of money at it. And I'm not even sure if it's been worth it to them at this point, but maybe it pays off. Maybe it will pay off. I don't know. So it's tough. It's tough to climb that hill.
Yeah, I would say if I was launching a new app, yeah, you can go to Podcast Movement and Podfest, but I would like go to different cities and I don't know, go to the library and do a how to listen to podcasts, 30-minute presentation and show people how to use my app. Because when you go to a current listener, you're asking them to leave something where they've already got playlists set up and their speeds and everything else that they've totally configured this to them. And now like, oh, I got to go over here and refind all my shows. I would go after people that aren't listening to podcasts yet. And then, because then when they learn on that new app, that's now the app that you're going to have to pry from their cold dead hands because they like, I've been using this for years. So I just remember tuning in back before I had one of these. Yes, kids, this is a radio. It's an actual
pulling out the Zune. I thought it was
no.
Zune. There's a Zune back there, isn't there? I like the brown one. I want a brown one. You don't have a Zune, Dave?
I do not have a Zune. I'd have to go.
Rio MP3 player.
I probably do somewhere. Yeah. And
still Rob's.
Yeah, that's it. But I would listen to, because TuneIn had sports. They had like baseball or something like that. I remember once, for whatever reason, the game was blacked out or something like that. And I was like, I wonder if I can listen to this on TuneIn. And I was. So I was like, well, that's kind of cool. But other than that, I haven't, it's not an app I frequent on a regular basis, if at all.
I mentioned overtaking Google, but what about Google jumping in and overtaking Spotify, Apple, right? John, you mentioned YouTube, right? And we've kind of all been sitting around waiting for YouTube to do something else with podcast, or for Google to open up hosting, right? They host video. That they won the video game. I said that they killed the video podcast star because they won video. There were video podcasts. You had to upload, you had to host them. It's still too expensive to host video podcast. Like we're not hosting this show. We're like an hour long, right? You could do, who has an 8-minute podcast anymore? In the early days, there were great like 8 to 10 minute video podcasts. It's kind of what they were, right? Because you had like Geek Brief and Tiki Bar TV and the news, the Rocket News. You had all that stuff that was short format. But now most podcasts are long format. And to host that on video, and there also used to be a bunch of free platforms. And you can't, people always say, oh, well, you host on YouTube and then you put that in a podcast, but you don't have access to the MP4 and all that stuff, right? So, could YouTube do this? Will they do this? Is it, I don't know. What do you think?
I still remember,
you kind of counted it.
I actually think that YouTube could do it, but I'm not entirely sure they're going to, because I think that their branding is, well, we're a video platform first, and they just want to. I think it's more convenient for them to rebrand what a podcast is and say, well, a podcast can have video too, and we got all the podcasts. And it's like, yeah, but it's not really audio. So if I have to look at a screen, I can't listen to it when I'm doing something with my eyes. Like I should be watching the road when I'm driving. Just a thought. But I think that they definitely have the capacity to do it. On the subject of video podcasts, by the way, I tried an experiment about 4 months ago over my Christmas holidays. I'm like, I'm going to do something different, which is, whenever I say that, I always get worried. But I got not a GoPro, it was a DJI Osmo, whatever, secondhand action cam anyway. And I connected it to the car and did a couple of little, driving sort of videos related to electric cars and so on. And I've done 5 episodes of it, and I hosted that myself on my server. I've got 2.5 terabytes of upload bandwidth, and I'm a geek and I own every layer of the stack because I'm a geek. I'm not your regular, Anyway, it doesn't matter. My point is that I posted that, and it was sort of, if it ever took off, it would kill my server. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually banking on it not taking off, which sounds odd. It was a bit of fun, a bit of an experiment, but it does not scale. So I can absolutely see why YouTube won. They have, but whether or not they can redefine what a podcast is remains to be seen, I think.
I mean, I think they almost broke themselves trying. Like YouTube didn't make money forever, from what I understand. They lost money hand over fist for like many, many years of its existence. And I mean, kudos to them. They saw the long game, I guess. And now they're practically what TV is. I mean, they're practically what music is. I mean, Spotify's competing with YouTube. But kids, it's free, people. When you want to hear music, I even go to YouTube and like, I want to hear that song. I'll put it on YouTube because I know it's there, right? I know I can get it with nothing in between. Now, you talked about being able to, they have the premium subscription, which lets you listen without watching. You can even not close the app, but minimize the app, do other stuff. So if you're in your car, there's just something about like, if there is a video player there, there's some type of barrier. Like we feel like it just feels wrong. Like, oh, you just have an image and audio, but if you just give me no image, just audio, that feels more like a podcast app. I don't know. Yeah, YouTube it's funny because we talked about, there was some research done fairly recently that asked people where they listen to podcasts, just open-ended. And I think YouTube was right at the very top, right? Because people who listen don't split it up, right? They don't define what a podcast is. They just know there's a podcast they like that's on YouTube. And that begs the question, like, are you on YouTube? Should you be on YouTube? How are you on YouTube? All of that stuff, which we've talked about plenty of times.
Well, and YouTube is coming to podcast movement. Is it Evolutions?
Nice.
Or the one in Dallas? But YouTube is
the
coming.
LA one, but
yeah, they're talking. So we're all kind of like, oh, because that's next week, and we're all like, what are they going to say? Like it's all like, okay, well now you got my attention.
Oh, they're speaking, or they just come? Because they've always lurked. I guarantee it.
Yeah, no, I believe somebody is coming and they're speaking. So that's when we all went, oh, because first they're there. I remember when they launched Google Podcast about probably 2 or 3 years ago. They were there and it was cool because they had a booth. Like you could talk to somebody from Google and they were explaining how, they were going to make podcasting bigger than
Zach?
ever. Yeah, it was Zach and a couple other people. Because remember the one guy I had his card.
We had a guy for a while. We had a guy.
Yeah.
Like we could tweet him. It was amazing.
And, I know it's hard to believe, but it seems like Google has retired that. Not that they ever, kill
That's
things
what they
that
do.
start.
I was going to bring that up. Don't forget that Google has tried and tried and tried at the podcasting thing, and they give up on it, right? Whether it's whether it's FeedBurner or what was the first iteration of Google Podcast? It was like, there was something. Google Listen?
Well, yes, Google Listen.
They've tried.
And then, well, and it's not really podcasting, but they had Google Plus was their answer to Facebook.
That was social,
Yeah. But so, and if you listen to James Cridlin, he's kind of mentioned that we all know Zach has gone into someplace else, and there was somebody over there.
Went to Apple, I believe.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. And if you listen to James is kind of like, I'm not sure who's running the ship at Google Podcasts. And it's like, it's a bummer because, they're number 3 now. So it's like,
without trying. You're not even trying. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's what I mean. 2 was up for grabs because no one was trying. Like, that's unfair to apps that are giving it a hard go, but I feel like it was there for one of these bigger companies to just be like, we're going to own at least the second spot, right? And Google feels like they could own it now. Spotify's come on very strong, so they probably have it.
And of course, their strategy is to make announcements that sound phenomenal and then just don't deliver on them.
Those are costly announcements they're making.
Yeah, it is costly announcements. That's true.
Awesome, John. Any more to add on this one? More thoughts?
I don't think so. I think that it's ground that we sort of covered a few times. Well, I should say you guys have covered several times on the show, and I do think that the next big players in podcasting are going to come from non-traditional podcasting areas like YouTube, like TikTok, and I think that that's sort of inevitable because of the scale you need to be operating at to actually offer some kind of competition. And Spotify just keep on throwing money at the problem and bringing in more and more platforms and people and so on. That's their play. They want to be the one-stop shop for your ears. Essentially, you want to listen to audio, they got what you need, kind of thing. And YouTube, in many respects, is trying the same kind of thing. They're just coming at it from a different angle. So it's gonna be interesting to see how this plays out in the next couple of years.
How does that affect us, the producers, even listeners? Like, how do you think, especially producers, right? If you're listening to this show, you probably make a podcast. So I don't know. Do you guys try? Is this just a part of Be Everywhere? Like, if there's an offer if there's a platform who says they're putting podcast on it, because here's the thing too, right? YouTube is not a podcast platform, so it's not as easy to just be there, right? Because you can't just put your RSS feed and they take it, right? And so now another distribution point for us as a podcaster. Now, Dave, you work at Libsyn, they have a tool that will do this over to YouTube, but not all do, and I bet not a lot of people. I bet that most people don't use that, and I don't know why. And I'm totally guessing. Maybe Dave, you know better. But as producers of podcasts, like, I guess what do I'm asking you guys? Is it, do you see new platform go to new platform, or you said TikTok, and I'm like, that makes me think I got to do something else, which I'm just not going to do, and so I'm making a choice of audience versus workflow, right? Bandwidth.
Yeah, I know. I heard Mark from Captivate mention about some platform. I want to say it was in Africa. Like, in the same way that Deezer is kind of the Pandora of Europe, and Ghana is the super popular audio thing in India, there's one in Africa that apparently is, coming down the pike. So, but that again is taking an app with a built-in audience and just, kind of shoehorning in podcasting.
I mean, as a producer though, do you look for new platforms, or do you just?
I do. That's one of my things that I scratch my head on, because when I see somebody that goes, "Oh yeah, I'm only in Spotify and Apple," and I was like, I get a couple hundred downloads from Ghana. Those people speak English, and they might know somebody who knows somebody who wants something that I offer. So, and it's free. That's the other one I go, it takes maybe a minute and a half to set yourself up on a platform. You do it once and then you're done. And there's it's not like it's going to hurt your show in any way. It's like, well, everything was doing great until I got more exposure in another country. I don't understand that. So that's the one that I just scratch my head, because they're like, well, I was thinking about using this one and maybe this one and that one. And I'm like, why would you not just list your show everywhere? Because, you never know who's listening.
Yeah,
I 100% agree. 100% agree. And I think that the first time I heard it was Dan Benjamin on 5x5 saying, be everywhere. He said, if I have a podcast, I want everyone to be able to listen to it from any platform that they want to. So I kind of look at it as there's two categories of those platforms. One's that, like you say, Dave, point to the RSS feed, claim your podcast, whatever, and then it'll automatically suck it up the next time you publish a new episode in your RSS feed. And it's kind of like it's 10, 15 minutes of your time, and then it's done, one and done kind of thing. You don't have to lift a finger. And then the other category is, well, now I've got an extra step. And the extra step is an example like YouTube. And what point is, well, they aren't going to do that. You have to encode the video. If you're on a platform like Libsyn, for example, they'll export. You can have an export option, which I actually did do on Causality for quite some time. I was skeptical, but it was actually low effort on my part. So, thumbs up to Libsyn for offering that. And then when I eventually turned that off for a myriad of reasons, I decided, you know what, I can actually just do that because I had it in Ferrite on my iPad. So I export that as a video and I upload it manually. So, but the funny thing is that the more I do this from time to time now, I've sort of looked at this between premium content, which is like ad free and so on, that I make in a high bit rate, high quality format that I offer for premium subscribers, and the public available stuff as well as the video stuff. My list of destinations, I've got a checklist that's like this long of things I've got to upload to, which it gets to be a bit of a hassle. But on the YouTube front, I do believe it is a destination that you do need to be in, even if it is just like my chapter artwork encoded against the audio. I know that some people, I've had feedback from people saying, oh, this isn't really a video. Why is it on here? And I have other people that have discovered the show, and it's usually based on things like anniversaries of different things. Like, so I do, Causality looks at cause and effect of disasters and incidents in history. And Ocean Ranger had its 40th anniversary of that incident a few weeks ago. And then that particular video was hovering around 150 views. It's now over 8,000 views. And it's like, and some of those people may start listening to, the podcasts and so on, broader beyond that, bringing in new listeners. I think you do have to be everywhere, even if it's not an ideal experience.
It ties in real nicely to the squeaky wheel. As one person said, why you on here doesn't make sense. And then you have a segment that is discovering your show, the actual healthy engagement. No one's helping you by telling you go away, right? So that's a troll. Ignore the trolls, like listen to the people, or, obviously if people are discovering you that wouldn't have discovered you before, that's a win, right? And then there was always this question of mixing in that type of content with a quote unquote regular YouTube channel. I wouldn't do that. I've done that. I keep going back to video podcasting because if you don't know, I my first podcast was a video podcast. But you remind me of the days when, as video podcasters, we had to manually upload to like 20 sites. And then there was a service called, I don't remember what it was called, which is crazy now. It feels crazy. That would finally do it for you. And that was amazing. But then you always had to check and it was a mess. And so, yeah, good days. But that is a perfect segue into, you talked about platforms that are not, I would say, podcast focused or podcast centric in that they take your RSS feed. However, there are podcasts on them, right? I mean, we talk about promotion all the time. And if you want to be on Instagram, you got to make some art and put some audio to it, do different things. These are all things that add to the limited time that most podcasters have. And it's like, do you or don't you? Is it worth it? Live streaming, right? I mean, that goes right into live streaming. And I put on our list that I want to talk about Twitter Spaces because that's sort of the newest thing that I've seen that is podcast-like, but is not. And it's live. If you haven't joined a Twitter Space, if you're on Twitter, you'll see someone's avatar just have a glowing circle around it, and it's live. It's just live streaming, but it's a live conversation. We've seen this multiple times. Was Meerkat? I still have the T-shirt. Was Meerkat video? I think it was video too, but audio only streaming is not like a thing we've seen too much of, if I'm recalling. But I've tuned into several Twitter Spaces recently. A niche that I've recently started following is very Twitter Space centric, and honestly, they're horrible. They're horrible. But the thing is that it's horrible in the worst way, because guess what? I want the information. Getting to it is it's just annoying. So between the bad audio quality, which, not most people, a lot of people aren't going to recognize or care about, maybe, I don't know. You'll certainly see podcast reviews that say your audio is terrible. I can't listen to this anymore. So you should pay attention to that. It is literally the one instrument you have when you're an audio podcaster. Put some investment into your time there, but, or time into your investment, whatever. So between that, but I mean, inevitably, right? What does everyone do when they start a live stream? Well, we'll give people 5-10 minutes to roll in here and we'll just wait. What are you doing? What are you doing? So fortunately, I would say most of these are recorded. They're not all recorded. It's an option. So like I can go back and scrub through this stuff, but it's just bad. And it makes me think of podcasts. What's the difference? And so I would not call this live streaming, because it is just like it sort of is. You sort of have the people who are on stage and they can invite other people on stage. I don't know. Have you guys checked out Twitter Spaces?
I am thinking about doing it now tomorrow.
But you'll do it well because you're coming from it as a producer of a show. So Twitter Spaces is just like people who aren't, they're not in podcasting.
How do you start a Twitter Space?
I assume from the app. I've never done it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I actually tried it just for the heck of it about 4 or 5 months ago. It's only been available in Australia since for about a year, and I just squeaked in above the requirements. The cutoff is like 600 followers. I got like 630 something on Twitter. I haven't really been super active on Twitter for the last 4 or 5 years. There's a lot of negativity out there, and the platform itself makes me like, gosh, it just triggers me. And maybe that's the whole algorithm. That's the point of the algorithm. We want you to be triggered. I don't really feel like being triggered right now. Anyway, so yeah, I just fired it up just for the heck of it, and I had one person join. They didn't actually say anything, and it was pretty much 20 minutes of nothing. And it's like, well, I suppose I thought, well, is that Twitter Spaces' fault, or is this I just don't have enough followers that are interested, that know what they're looking for? It was still early days, so it may be a different story now. I joined a couple of other Twitter Spaces, and funny thing is, Ray, what you just described is exactly what happened. They're like, well, we're just going to wait a few more minutes for a few more people to join. And I'm like looking at my watch and I'm like, I don't have a few more minutes. I'm out. Bye. Thanks. This was a waste of my time. It was frustrating. I did not enjoy one star.
I mean, live streaming, we've often talked about, Dave, as it's like bonus content almost, right? It's for your hardest core user. And when you say we're starting at 4, like that's when the content should be there, right? It's not, we're going to start gathering, hanging. It's not a cocktail party. Like, they're not going to mingle first. Like, I came here with intention, and as a person who is producing something, the hardest thing you can get is get someone to send you email or feedback. Then it's to show up to your live stream. very hard, right? That's why time shifted content is so successful, because it's on someone else's schedule. So if someone shows up to your live performance, what we're doing here, try to start on time, but we get to the content, and we understand this as show makers, right?
Well, I always wonder, like, at their job, is their boss like showing up? It's 8 a.m. and he's like, let's see if anybody shows up today. Like, no, you show up at work on time. So obviously you have the skills to show up and perform at a certain time. But if it's a webinar, it's like, hey, where's everybody from? Oh, look, Poughkeepsie. Good. Oh, all right. Cincinnati's in the house. Oh, Texas. It's hot there. Yes, I'm like, it's so boring. And then if that's not bad enough, when you then post it later, you do not edit it out. Right. So now I have to fast forward through, oh, London's in the house. Look at oh, wow, Brisbane. It's like, okay, that drives me nuts.
Matique here says the Clubhouse was just as ridiculous. So Twitter Spaces felt like an answer to Clubhouse. Like Clubhouse was not stealing, but they were getting a lot of attention. Like it was part of the scarcity model, because you early on you couldn't get in, like, unless you were like specially invited or something ridiculous like that. And when that ran out, so did Clubhouse. I don't know, it's probably still a thing, there's probably still a community there, but he said it started out fresh and exciting and quickly devolved into something boring and horrible, which is what I feel like most of these turn into. Now you could say the same thing about podcasts, like in terms of Anchor opened up, you got a bunch of trash in there because it was low effort content. And that, I'm always torn between did that help or hurt podcasting, right? In terms of like, it got people in, it got in words and voices that wouldn't have been heard, but it also turned a lot of people off because they couldn't weed through the garbage, right? So same thing with Twitter Spaces. These things never seem to last because I don't think that they are, what you find out is the most of them are not that great. And I don't know if podcasts work better because when you find one, you can just subscribe and then you can kind of count on it. It's more organized, really is, because at least then I know what the podcast is going to give me week to week. Twitter Space is very random. Now, if we as podcasters ran a regular Twitter Space, it would be much different. But whether the platform's going to be there or not in a year, probably not.
But Ray, they're just keeping it real. That's all.
They are just keeping it real.
They're keeping it real. When I was in Nashville, I was talking to somebody and I said, so tell me about your podcast. And he said, oh, we do it Rogan style. Just me and a couple friends talking for 2 hours. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that's not a thing. Like, it is a thing. But I was like, you're like, are you interviewing celebrities like Joe is? Oh. Well, then it's probably not going to work.
What do you want to get out of it? Like, it's going to work if you and your friends are having fun. So I joke about
that's what I said.
Dudes in a comic book. It works if that is like your weekend activity, stellar. But, most people who start a show, they actually want people to hear it. And they want more people to hear it every week, because why else are you talking to a microphone and putting it out in the world? John, you look like something.
I'm nodding a lot because I'm agreeing a lot. I think the problem with live for me is that it's a time, it's like a time slice of exposure. So, if I put a podcast out there that's up there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anyone may happen across it, and they'll just, oh, that looks interesting, I'll just keep that for a rainy day kind of thing, or when I'm doing my combine harvester up and down the field or whatever I'm doing, and they may like it, they may listen to it, and they say, oh, this is really good, I'll give another episode a go of that. And before you know it, they're hooked on it and they listen to every episode and so on, and you've got a fan and a follower of the show. But with live, the problem is that you've got this little slice in time when you're actually making that content. And I know you can record it and post it later, but the attraction of live is to be there when it's live, so that what you can do is you can say, well, here are some comments like we have right now on this show, coming in real time, we can talk about it on the show. But that's a very narrow slice of time in a week. If you're not there for that narrow window, you miss out. And it's the problem with that is that in order to get more people to actually come onto that, they have to come on when it's happening. And I did actually stream Pragmatic Live at two different stages of the production of it. So back in 2014, I did it, and I did it again in 2018. And it never really caught on because I could never find a time zone that suited everybody. There are a lot of US based listeners, like the majority of my listeners are in the US, but I have a reasonable number from Europe and a reasonable number from Australia. So finding one time to do it is extremely difficult. So I felt like in the end it wasn't worth the effort. So I kind of pulled the pin on live. I asked recently the patrons. I put a survey and said, "Hey guys, would you be interested in resurrecting live?" And the answer was a unanimous no. So
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a different skill. I know when I first started doing things on StreamYard, I was horrendous because I could not stop, like mid-sentence. I'd be talking along and be like, and really my favorite microphone is, "Oh, look, Tina said this." And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was just all over the place. So that has to come in. If you're taking I have it set up where people can jump into StreamYard while I'm doing it live. You better have the skill and the courage and the courage to tell someone, "Hey, thanks so much for showing up. We're glad you're here," and kick them out. Because if you listen to any radio show, somebody would be like, "Man, I think the Browns should trade Mayfield. He's an idiot, and that's why." And then the host will say, "Yeah, he didn't have a good year last year, blah blah blah." And then the guest will go, "Yeah, I think we should trade him. He's awful." Like they just keep repeating the same point. And that's where, as the host, you have to realize, okay, this person has said all they like, whatever they were bringing to the table, they put it on the table and they don't want to leave. So you have to have the skill to go, "Hey, thanks so much for calling, Sparky. And next up we have whatever." But yeah, live's a whole other thing. Plus, if you're the engineer and you're trying to do fun things like, "Oh, that wasn't good," now you have a lot going on. So it's live is fun. I get maybe 3% of my audience if I'm lucky that shows up live. So that's the other thing. And then you have to make sure not to go. My favorite is when I listen to Joe Rogan watch YouTube. That's the best audio ever because he's like, "Hey, Terry," or whatever his co-host is, "Put that up on the screen. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Oh, did you see audio?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is fabulous audio." So that drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's
Ray, you have a comment.
No, so Tiana says my favorite podcast records live. I love it because they bring questions and comments from the live chat. My input gets into the podcast each week. Well, there you go, Tiana. Your input is put into this podcast, but there you go. It's because and we can do that, right? Why does this show do live? Because the StreamYard is it's a tool I use to connect remotely with people in Australia. Like, quite honestly, it's easy. All right.
Yeah.
StreamYard has made. I produce at work where I'm not on camera, and I also use StreamYard, and it depends. Like, I'll use Riverside for remote recording because you'll get the highest quality remote recording, but I use StreamYard day in and day out for this style of roundtable type podcast because I did it all from my phone. I produce from my phone. Everything you see me doing here, which actually I do a lot more, bring in banners and CTAs and all this stuff. StreamYard makes it extremely easy and people can join. They don't have to be on Chrome. Like, they can be on most devices, like just all these reasons, right? So it's the right tool for the right job. And for the roundtable, we do this. And look, I'm talking to podcasters, so audio, right? The audio's mixed. However, and I don't have a premium StreamYard because, as you see, that John's got the lovely StreamYard duck today. Congrats, John. Skype headphones and all. You're the winner. But it's the Mallard Award for Stream. We love you, StreamYard, because you're free and you're still here. And which is Dave's, not a good business model. But they have a premium and they'll split out. I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know about sync issues and all that stuff. And it's not an endorsement. # not sponsored, all of that. But yeah, we do it because it's easy. And I talk to podcasters, the audio is good. I do some live mixing here in real time so that when that audio is done, I actually record it on this side natively. So mine is a separate track from the guest, but the guests, they know how to do audio. Now, most podcasts are not going to have this. They're not going to have the luxury of bringing on people who have great mic setups and know how to be on microphone. So it works for this. But let's see, my favorite podcast here, Doesn't Wait. She starts on time. And there was another, let's see, Tiana also said if you do it right, doing a live recording of your podcast can work really well. And I think doing it right, Dave, you mentioned how a lot of it is not post-produced, right? So a Twitter space might get recorded and then it just sits there as the same raw, ugly audio that it was. And there is some element to, if you're live, you might be able to do that. You might be able to welcome people in and have a little bit of almost pre-show. and post show, but as a recorded show that you're going to publish, right? That should then be tightened up, so to say. So we do it because it's convenient and it works. Do I think this does well? And, we get, I don't know what we get. Any one of these can do, 500 or 1,000 views on YouTube over time, and the audio is going to do better. But again, we're back to that thing where we're being discovered. So it's a bonus, right? Live is also a super bonus. We do like feedback, and we try to work that in when possible. But this is a hardcore podcast roundtable. Listener is going to actually maybe come over once in a while, see what we look like, and quickly run away back to the audio only.
Well, and I always wonder if it's just me. If you're listening to an audio podcast and it's good and the host is talking to you and it's a great content, and then all of a sudden towards the end, they go, hey, and don't forget, be sure to like, subscribe, and smash the bell. There's a part of me that goes, oh, they're not talking to me. And I don't know if that's just a Dave thing, but for the whole time, I thought they were talking right to me, and I was like, oh, I've just been listening in on a YouTube thing. Do you guys feel that way too? Or is that just a me thing?
If you're saying it, clearly somebody's thinking it, right? Not just you.
Right.
So, which is important, right? Because again, when we're doing live, if I'm showing something like, oh, hey, check out this new microphone that I got, you better describe the microphone. You need to understand what you're doing and who your audience is, that you're going audio only at some point. Love your book back there, Dave. And if that's all I say, but like, what's the book? Like, give me the title. Like, what is he talking about, right?
Yeah.
So don't make the audio only audience work for it or miss out on it. But so yeah, I mean, if you are thinking something, again, what is like the teacher in class always said, ask no stupid questions, because if you have the question, someone else does too. So your audience is also having those same thoughts. So if you have those thoughts, especially as a producer, that's important feedback that you just got from yourself to be conscious of in your own productions.
There you go.
Yeah, I think, Dave, you raised an interesting point about it is a different technique when you're doing live. And just thinking about that as you were saying, and I'm like, well, maybe that's where I failed in my attempts, is that I didn't draw in enough of the comments. I mean, I did, but I probably could have done a better job of it. So upon reflection, it was a few years ago. But the other point, to reiterate, is it has to be the right show for it, because there are so many podcasts of so many different kinds. Some are heavily produced, some are just chats amongst friends and so on and so forth. And shows like Causality, for example, where I just record it solo. I mean, there's no point doing that live. I'd like to say it's all done in one take. Okay, it's done in a take, but there's a lot of editing anyway. So it's like that's very different. Whereas Pragmatic was the only one for me that really fit. And even they didn't quite fit quite so well. So I think if you have the right kind of show that can incorporate that live content and you do it well, then there's probably a place for it. So maybe the key question to anyone who's producing a podcast is my podcast the right fit to even try live in the first place? And if it is, then have at it and see how it goes, I suppose.
Yeah, that's hugely important. I've done solo shows. This is the first show. I wouldn't have actually, I was going to say I wouldn't do that with a solo show. I did that. That's the Podcaster Studios started off as the whole concept was a live streamed podcast Q&A type of format. And guess what? When you're new, no one's there asking you questions.
No.
So it's just me playing bad Creative Commons DJ music, making up questions, or having some friend bring in a question. It didn't work. I got that. Would it work better now? Sure. Still really hard, as Dave probably knows, with the his podcast review show. You really have to plan for that kind of engagement, I think. And so build up a massive audience, because again, such a small percentage is going to show up live. So it really does go to, I mean, I did see a solo podcast do like a live stream of a show, and it was very fascinating probably because I'm a person who produces podcasts, to see the sausage being made. But that was a one-off, right? You're like, am I going to tune into this every week? Probably not, right? So it's a very good point to pay attention to, does your format fit a live format?
Yeah, I know I had 1 week where my co-host let me know, hey, we usually do 90 minutes. I can only stay an hour. I'm like, not a problem. And so we politely dismissed him at the appropriate time. And I had 30 minutes, and I'm thinking, not a problem. At that point, the chat room will be popping along. I'll have topics, and it's doing live solo is very strange because you're kind of looking for your audience to be the co-host and chime in, except there's what, a 30-second delay on StreamYard. So there's this, it's just a weird getting any kind of momentum going, and you're just begging. I was begging people to pop in and play co-host, and it was one of those things. I'm like, okay, note to self: the next time Jim has to leave early, we're shutting the show down. Like, hey, thanks so much. We're only doing 60 minutes this week. See you later. Bye. So
Effie says, I would say never in my life will I make time to listen to a live podcast in my schedule. Yet, alas, here I am for the third time as I pull my son up and down the building's hallway. So shout out to Effie for being a power listener. She loves the roundtable. We love her. So thank you so much. But again, your hardcore audience may tune in. So
right.
It really is, why are you doing it, right? And we do it as it's because it's an easy way for us to record with remote people. You know, I always talk about production, and, you know, people say, oh, do you send microphones to your guest? Not on this show, other shows. And, you know, if you are doing a regular co-host, if it was just Dave and I showing up every week, I would expect different things of Dave. Now, he already has those things, good audio, and, you know, the video looks good. But when you have guests who are coming in for one time only, right?
Yeah.
This is what this platform really helps with, because you have to lower the barriers to that entry as much as possible, right? Obviously, I'm going to make sure that they, you know, I'm going to ask, can you wear some headphones? Do you have a decent microphone? And we walk them through what that is. But again, so this show, this live format, we're just lucky that there's a live button in addition to the record button, and it just all works out. And we have, you know, we get to get the audience involved here, because again, as I said at the top of the show, that's what this show's all about, is like, give us your experience, right, at every level. So I think great point, John, about, you know, does your show sort of fit the format? And then is it too much work to add it, really? And
is it worth the payoff? Because it's,
yeah, it's not, there's no, I don't know how much payoff there is other than connecting with your audience, which is really cool. Like, seeing people who listen is amazing, because you don't see that when you're doing a podcast by yourself and you're not live and you're not somewhere where people are interacting with you. I mean, obviously if you get emails and stuff, but it feels different in real time, right? So if you want to connect with that, you know, with a portion of your audience, it's really good for that too.
Yeah, that's
sorry. Go ahead, it's kind of a middle ground. Like when I'm up on stage giving a presentation, I can see how many people are looking down at their phone, and it can get depressing sometimes. You get the ones that are engaged and so on, you know. But this is somewhere in the middle, you know. So you can you do get some time delayed feedback, but you know, that's yeah. Anyway, so yes, and the Australian guy, hi, my name's John Chigi. Hello. So thank you. It's all good.
We you know, Blab was good for actually getting the audience into the stream, right? If you wanted to bring, hey, caller, except the caller was on video most of the time. And if you were lucky, the caller didn't come in to just troll your stream and rip you. But yeah, I don't know. It hasn't, Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces are the two most recent sort of like, let's just turn this thing on and see what happens with a few of our friends. And so while I've wanted to get the content off of there, it's very difficult. And I think it's just the difference is production, right? And it's even branding. Like Twitter Space is supposed to probably be pretty casual, where I think Clubhouse felt like it was a little more organized, that the mission was like to have a presentation, right? Whereas Twitter Spaces feels like, hey, press this button and go live, which is, you know, like Instagram Live, probably no different. It's like, go live anytime. Let's do this. So I'd like to see, you know, look, if you're doing Twitter Spaces, care about your audio, maybe get to the point. That's all I'm saying.
or have a point.
Have a point is very, yeah. Well, you know what? I mean, the ones that I tune into, that's how you got me. You got me. I mean, look, if you're a YouTuber, you learn very fast that if you do not deliver on the title, they're gone. And YouTube gives you, because they're walled garden, they give you the analytics, and you learn real fast, or you don't, and then you don't get many views. But if you're a good YouTuber, because of those analytics, you learn real quickly that, like, if you got someone to click play, like, you are 75% of the way there. Like the thumbnail worked, the title worked, and then you opened up, and here's what happens every time. Blah, 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 2 minutes. Let's get right into it. They always say, let's get right into it. What are you talking about, dude? You just didn't get right into it. Can you see a pet peeve? So, hey, this is from a YouTuber to a YouTuber, get to the point really quickly.
Or here's another phrase. But before we get to that,
Yeah.
and I always want to go, if you hear yourself saying that, whatever comes after that phrase better be really, really good stuff, because your audience is like, hey, we're waiting for the stuff. And you're saying, oh, but before I get to that, I'm like, so, because there are times when I say that, I'm like, oh, I'm breaking my own rule. All right.
There's all these verbal triggers, and this goes for podcasts too. When you start to say, well, that was a pretty good conversation, or that's probably a good place to wrap up. And guess what you're planning to do after that sentence? Well, after about like 5 more sentences, you're planning to give all your calls to action. Hey, sign up. They're gone. Like you can see it in your analytics. As soon as you have any kind of verbal cue that it is over, that line goes straight down on the graph. They are gone, man. People hit stop.
You could do the Marvel thing where you have a little snippet after the credits to keep them there.
And I have done that as a producer, but like most people don't find out till later that they missed it.
That's it.
Yeah.
You know what's amazing? We did not make the shortest roundtable ever.
No.
In fact, quite the opposite. This could end up being one of the longest, because what have we done? We've done one story. Now I turned the intro into a whole other story, which is what we do here. But let's actually let me look. So we got one of John's stories. Dave, is yours more compelling? I mean, we get this conversation about keeping your listeners here.
It's more about if you're trying to get an advertiser. Tom Webster has a latest episode of I Hear Things. And in a nutshell, it used to be if you wanted to reach 50% of all of the podcast audience, you had to advertise on 7 different networks to reach that without having any kind of overlap.
When you say networks, what do you mean?
Like the iHearts, like you
mean actual platform. Those are platforms.
Right, platforms. That's a better one. So, and he said they just redid that study, and now you only have to advertise on 4 platforms to reach
the entire quote
50%. 50% a week. Yeah, I thought originally it was everybody. It's 50% of weekly listeners. And the reason for that is all these platforms keep buying the really popular shows. And I think it was 2 weeks ago he mentioned that most of the growth in podcasting is coming from the really popular shows that are getting people to, hey, did you hear what so-and-so the celebrity said on this week's show kind of thing. And I just thought about it. I was like, well, that keeps going down. On one hand, I'm kind of worried about it because if you're not on a big network, how are you going to get advertising? So I understand that thought. But I also say, yeah, but they're also not pulling in super niche shows. They're bringing in celebrity shows and things like that. And I have a niche show. I do a podcast about podcasting, and yet I can still get sponsors. Now, I don't have enough downloads to quit my day job and that whole 9 yards, but I just thought it was interesting that the networks are getting bigger and the shows on the networks are getting more listeners. So if you're into advertising and you have a show that's everything for everybody, you have it niched down a bit, that might be a little, a harder road to go down if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to start a podcast and get advertising. And it's like, that's never really worked, for 90% of podcasters, but based on that particular report, it's not going to get better apparently anytime soon. So,
well, there's 2 things there, right? If you're an advertiser saying, should I get in a podcast? What are you advertising, right? If you're advertising soda, you have to get across the mass audience, right? But if you're advertising, like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something very niche, right? If you're advertising, what's that?
Belt buckles. I don't know.
Belt buckles, right? There's a lot of I won't stereotype anyone, but there's a lot of shows that you could probably get to and be more successful with your money. So, and as a podcaster who is looking for advertising, I think a lot of people would see that stat and be very disappointed, right? But look, most of you who listen to this, you're probably indie podcasters, which is like I would categorize as sub 1,000 to I don't know, around the 1,000 range listeners, right? Like real come back every week type listeners. Those aren't the advertisements you want. You're not
Yeah.
making money with that. Like that's Google banner ads on your blog. It's intrusive to your audience for a few pennies. The advertiser you want is the belt buckle guy, right? Like who you have a show about, you know, I don't know, country western wear or something, and like 90% of your audience wears a belt buckle, and you know what I'm saying? It's like there's an advertiser for you. That's not the one. You don't want the soda people.
Right.
You want something that fits your audience. So like I get it. What it says to me also too is like if you listen to this show, I could probably pull up your podcast app and also find maybe like 5 other shows, and one of them is a top 10 show, right? So that like people who listen to podcasts also listen to like a show that gets a lot of reach, because like you said, a lot of times that's people's entry point into podcasting, right? And then if they're lucky, they dive off and they find something very specific for them, right? But
Well, and that was one of Tom's points. It's like if, you know, these smaller shows want advertising, and that in itself, there are some people like, I don't want ads. I'm just doing this for fun.
most don't.
But he was saying if you want any kind of advertising in the future, you're going to have to learn how to work together. And to me, networks, I am not sold on the concept of a network, but somehow you're going to have to tie yourself together to say, okay, I've got 6 shows. We all talk about the same thing. Mr. Niche Sponsor, you won't work with 2,000 downloads, but will you work with 10 now that I've got 5 shows kind of thing. So, which I agree. I mean, obviously more downloads makes it much easier to get a sponsor, but I'm not sure everybody's sold on getting a sponsor. And I don't know, that's networks. I had a network this week where basically, well, I've said this before, Ernie and Bert start a podcast because they've known each other forever. You know, 3 years later, they don't talk to each other. And, you know, it's Bert locked Ernie out of the account, deleted all the files. It's just not pretty. So be careful if you're going to, you know, team up with another podcast. It gets ugly.
It makes me want to ask John, there's someone who I think said has had a lot of podcasts or either runs sort of a network like,
It started out that way, right? It started out where I had some other people that were signing up to produce content as well, and they would get a split of the ad revenue back in 2015. But I learned very quickly that I wanted to get engineers on the podcasts space. I wanted more engineers, like genuine out there in the field, mechanical, process engineers, chemical engineers, and so on. Well, it turns out they're making a heck of a lot more money doing their day job. They're really, really sold on giving up their personal time to give away, in essentially, their knowledge for what was a disproportionate amount of money. The ultimate conclusion was it wasn't worth it for them, for their time. So it started out more as a network with that, and then over time it just ended up being me, which is why every time I look at Engineered Network as a title, I stuck with the branding, but it reminds me a lot of 70 decibels back when it was all just Mike Early kind of thing, and I feel much the same kind of way as Mike did at the time. So that was an interesting experience. Again, a hard lesson. But for me, what I struggled with early on is I did have like Pragmatic in 2014 was really taken off. I was getting sponsors really easily, like big name sponsors and so on. Well, I call them big name sponsors, but like my experience particularly with Squarespace is that their cutoff level, their threshold just kept going up and up and up. So it started out at like 5,000 downloads in a 30-day period. And then 6 months, 7 months later, I went back and it was up to 25,000. And it's gone up again since then. So they won't even talk to you if you're at if you're not above that minimum threshold. And a lot of the advertisers, they want to know that their investment's going to get a return. So they equate more downloads to more ears, and hence a better return. You watch your conversion rates and so on and so forth, which is fine because that's their business. They're advertising. They want to see a reaction, a response, and a return on their investment, which I understand. But the part that was difficult for me to learn initially is that the difference between an advertiser and a sponsor. Whereas a sponsor is more interested in just brand recognition, getting their name out there, and they're not so concerned about getting massive return on it. But they tend to stand by you for longer, and those sorts of sponsors are gold. So I I had a long-running sponsor in Many Tricks, and they continued to sponsor the show up until very recently, where I kind of made a bit of a decision. It had nothing to do with any of the sponsors or advertisers, but I just decided that I was getting enough money from Patreon support as well as from Apple channel podcast subscription that I didn't really need to be bothering with sponsors. And so I found that niche and I built that audience. But that took 7-8 years of continuing to create content. It didn't happen overnight. And that kind of led me down the road of, well, I guess there's different flavors of advertising and sponsors. And if you want to make money from your podcast, it's certainly in my niche anyway, is the niche method with premium supporters that want to just encourage you to keep making the content. But that was my experience anyway. Certainly your mileage may vary, but.
You sure it wasn't 7 days or 7 months or 7 years? See, I say that to everybody. That's like the norm that I hear. And there are definitely cases like John's where it's longer. On occasion, I'll run to people who are shorter, but I usually tell people 3 years, like minimum, if you're starting from zero. If you've got somebody else, maybe not as long, but it takes a while. How do you like the iTunes subscription? You're the only person I know that's actually doing that.
Keyed in on that too, man. I was like, he is the first I've heard say anything about it.
Okay. I did a couple of articles on my blog. I have another blog, techdistortion.com, and I did blog on my experiences, but just the high-level summary is I got on the platform and it took me a long time to get in when they first announced it. I imported the audio in a way that was not the way they intended it to be used. So I ended up having to scrub it all and start over once it was actually out because I couldn't beta test it. And so once I got it beta tested, it's just another destination. The things that I do like about it is that it makes it very easy for people to subscribe and support that way. But that's pretty much where it ends. I mean, it's an Apple interface, so it's kind of nice and pretty and lovely and all that, and that's great. Not a negative, but the negatives for me are you have no idea who your listeners are. There's no way for them to really give you any feedback. You can't get in touch with them. And on the technical level, you have to upload a stereo WAV file. I mean, I've been producing podcasts in 96 kilobit mono for forever, less than that in some cases, for bandwidth constrained people. And having to upload a uncompressed wave in stereo, which is really just the same channel duplicated left and right. And of course, as a wave, you can't have embedded chapters. You can't have anything. It's and then they apply their DRM to it, and that can take hours. Like I've uploaded a wave file that was like 1.4 gig or something like that, which is not hard to do. An hour and a half show, right?
Right.
And yeah, and I hit refresh. It says processing audio, and I'm like, yeah, but like you're still going? Okay. How much? I don't even know how much compute resources they're throwing at this thing, but it can't be much. I don't anyway. So it's been okay. I'm probably getting about 10 to 15% of my overall podcast income from that space, but that's taken a year to build up, and it took a while to get started. So, yeah.
Do you know what? And if you say, Dave, I'd rather not answer that. That's fine. Do you know what percentage of your total downloads has now gone to premium?
That's a great question. I do not. No. For Causality is the only show I'm really tracking downloads on, and even that off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. No, it's a good question though. Sorry, I wish I did know now.
My guess is going to be 3%.
Probably.
Because the one that still blows me away is I was listening to Radiolab, and Radiolab has a gazillion people listening to it. I mean, it's this great science show and the whole 9 yards. And they did kind of a PBS thing where they're like, hey, we're raising money. We've got to do this. And, we have a big team and we're jetting all over the country to make these things for you. And if you'd like to support the show, you could, for just, $13 a month, you can feed a small child or whatever their pitch was. And they said, we're trying to get up to 1%. And I was like, wait a minute. This is a show that when you say Radiolab, if you're in front of a listener, they're like, oh my God, I love that show. And they're trying to get up to 1%. And I was like, wow, that's depressing.
That's a lot of money though. I mean, there's two sides to it.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
that's 1% of their audience is outtake.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
But why are they having so much trouble converting a rabid audience, right, into premium? Right? It just tells you it's really tough. Like these are these high threshold events that I'm telling you are really hard. Feedback, live, like premium very hard, right? And you might not need much to convert, but if you're motivated by any of those, you're probably starting off in the wrong place. You have to be motivated by the content. You just have to. Creating
Yeah.
Daily said I was able to get 10,000K sponsor with 400 total downloads on my saltwater fishing show. Got to frame the sales pitch correctly. Quality over quantity works with big and small brands. And so, my only question is, did that deliver, right? Like there's also the scary thing of of pitching, and then the advertiser's like, we didn't get any conversions from that.
squat.
We're gone, right? So you got a lot of money one time, and he probably did. I mean, this is a saltwater fishing show, right? Very targeted, right? If you're selling saltwater fishing boats, one sale, and that advertiser's very happy, right? I'm coming back, right? If you're selling rods, some of those are very expensive, but maybe you have to sell a lot more, right? So it all goes back. We keep talking about like, what's the fit for your audience? What's the style of your show? Like it's all a personalized fit. And so, if you need a personalized fit here, if you want to get links in real time, this is the shout out I do to tune into the live and the video before I start saying this is the end. I'm putting it right here. Dave puts links to all this great stuff, even links that you might not get when you go to the show notes at podcastersroundtable.com. Dave puts them in the chat. I mean, this is what co-hosts do for you. That's a whole other question. Host, co-host, we won't go into that. We'll save that. We've done that before. But I'm just saying, podcastersroundtable.com/live. Check us out. They signed, let's see, Creating says, yeah, they signed 52 weeks this year. So, hey, right advertiser, right audience.
Yep.
It works. So we'll have to get... Creating Daily here, which is you know what, that must be the YouTube channel. I don't know. Podcastersroundtable.com/guest Creating Daily.
Yeah.
Come on, we'll talk to you. I mean, generally we do like you to have a podcast, but it sounds like you do have one. I assume that's not just like a YouTube show. Maybe you're calling that a podcast. Ooh, that's fun stuff because we deal with that too. So definitely sign up, and that obviously applies to everyone who's listening. Do we want to hit that that last story? Can we do it? Look, if you're live, you're free to go. This is the rule of what's the conference, Dave, where the rule was
we're not WordCamp, PodCamp.
PodCamp, which was was like you can
vote
feel
with your
comfortable,
feet.
get up and leave. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what, as a presenter, it's weird to get someone sees John. You talk about presenting. Someone gets up and leaves in the middle of your middle of your talk. It feels very much like a vote of confidence in your presentation. But when you go into it understanding, hey, I just want to check in and don't be offended. So the presenter knows, the audience knows, because even an audience member, I'm like, ooh, I want to stay because I don't want them to feel like that, right? So apparently I'm too sensitive. But so if you're live, bail out. We're gonna attack this one story. We went from shortest to longest roundtable ever. Let's do this. That's John's story. What do we got?
Okay. So this is also sort of about the whole Spotify situation. And I find it interesting. I have a point of personal interest with audiobooks, and particularly this one. So this is Spotify's latest purchases, is that they've acquired Findaway Voices. And Findaway Voices is an audiobook production platform, service, what do you want to call it. So if you want to create an audiobook, you go to them and you say, who have you got, and look at the rates, do an audition. And then, as an audiobook producer, then I can record that and so on. And they handle all the payments and all that sort of stuff. But then it goes out to pretty much every platform you can imagine. So whether that's Audible, whether that's Apple Books, I forget what they call it now. I think it is just books. But in any case, it goes out to the Kindle store, all that. And honestly, because I've done 2 audiobooks via that service. So my ears sort of pricked up when Spotify bought them. And I'm like, okay, so it's a clear part of their play that an audiobook is a very highly produced podcast of a certain kind of podcast, I should say. It's kind of funny because I was thinking about this the other day with Causality, because Causality is heavily scripted, but it's not a book. I could turn it into a book and then call it an audiobook if I wanted to, rather than a podcast. The line is very different. But of course, then you've also got non-fiction books and fiction books, and someone reading Harry Potter is very different from me doing an episode of Causality. But anyway, so what I found interesting about this was because Spotify is just taking the next slice and the next slice and the next slice. If it's audio, they want to play in that space. And I'm not entirely sure that's a good thing in the long term because, my experience with Findaway was great because you could get on any platform. But are they going to start locking that down and saying, no, now it's Spotify exclusive? Kind of, that's my concern in the longer term.
And I definitely think that's a valid concern because everything I've seen from Spotify is we're buying all these tools and, I feel like I'm at a Pink Floyd concert. They're just putting up another brick in the wall and they're building it up to where eventually it's like, well, I just in Nashville, I was at this thing called the Gaylord Hotel, and it was literally like 5 hotels that they just stitched together. They're like 7 different restaurants in it. The whole point of it is you don't have to leave. You can just stay here and keep spending your money right here. I mean, they had a boat ride in the middle of the hotel. I mean, it was huge. And I think that's what Spotify is looking for. They want to have a boat ride in the middle of their app. It's so big. And I don't blame them. I'm with what John is saying. It's like, wait, I liked this service before because it did this, and then it got acquired, and now, it doesn't do what it used to do. And, which just means somebody else has to step into that spot where they were and say, hey, remember those guys, how they used to do this? We do that now. So it'll be interesting to watch.
I haven't actually seen Spotify push on the actual. It's only just happened recently in the last few months, so it's one of those watch this space. And right now they haven't pulled the pin on other platforms. It's business as usual. But of course, that tends to be the way these things go. Is I'll do BAU for the next 6 months, 12 months, and then suddenly the hammer falls, and it's like, yeah, how we used to go to output to Apple Books store, not anymore. Sorry, go somewhere else, kind of thing. So we'll wait and see. But I think you share my concern with that, Dave. So yeah.
Well, and also, does that mean I'm going to have to listen to your book in Spotify? Because I have a whole library in Audible, and I've got my, I've got my favorite audiobook app. It'd be interesting to see how they do that, and should be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, they tried to move YouTube viewers over to Spotify. I don't know that worked out very well, right? I mean, podcast listeners, a little easier, right? Even though I gotta have 2 apps, right? I mean, it's not easy, but it must be nice to have a ton of money to sort of throw at the wall and see what sticks. Because I think that's like Google, who tries a lot of things that we like, but not enough people like them, or not enough people use them. They might like them, and then they go away.
And there's always that slightly cynical voice in my head, being an old musician, that I go, yeah, don't forget that, behind the scenes, a lot of the people that are pulling the strings are, record labels and such that have worked a deal with Spotify. And I'm like, record labels not really known for treating their customers or fellow employees, if you want to call a musician an employee. I'm like, So I hate to, I don't know, judge how's that go? Judge the child by the parent or whatever. But I'm like, we'll see how this works out. So.
Awesome. Well, I didn't do the thing where you said earlier where I should have asked the guest, can you stay a little longer? I said I excused the audience. Everyone, you can go, but I kept John here. His morning he's just started his morning. He probably has like a whole list of things to do. Dave and I are like, Dave's definitely at the end of the night. I'm winding down to the end of the night. But so I want to say thank you, John, for hanging out with us a little extra longer. And, that's a good sign. When we go long, it just meant that, you did a really good job and we enjoyed the conversation. So once a roundtabler, always a roundtabler. We'll have you back on anytime. Why don't you let us know where we can find, I guess, one podcast or,
or like all your stuff.
I have the one website that takes it all the things, which I assume you do too. So
exactly.
Thanks again.
Yeah, well, no worries. Thanks for having me. It's been fantastic. If people are looking for my work on the Engineered Network, it's at engineered.network. Just go to that full network, not like .net. Some people get that. But yeah, so engineered.network, and you'll find all the shows that I make. The ones I make most regularly are Causality and Pragmatic. And if you're into Twitter, I'm also at John Chidgey on Twitter. And if you're into the Fediverse, it's at Chidgey at engineered.space.
Awesome. And we'll link it up in the show notes, podcastaroundtable.com. Do you have engineered.net? I doubt it because that's probably pricey. Yeah.
Yeah, that was no.
Yeah.
Not
because there's always that trick, right? You're like, the thing that people tend to do sometimes, it's good to have them, but it is hard to do that in the domain space because Dave owns them all. I mean, you could probably buy it from
I
Dave.
do own a few, yes.
He has quite a problem there. They're on the bookshelf. I can see him. I see all your domains, Dave. They're hanging out. Put those away, buddy. It's not a flex. Awesome. Well, hey, Dave Jackson, co-host, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, always fun. Ray said this earlier. It's always, at the end of these, you always like, oh, that's why we do this. This was a lot of fun. It's always great hanging out. Thanks to the chat room. You can find me, Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
Yes, Dan. Better late than never. Dan Powers in the chat showing up at the end. The beauty is that we are time shifted. So, and I am recording this. Unlike Twitter Spaces that sometimes don't get recorded, which just feels it's either incompetence or they're just messing with you. Right? Guess what? I'm not. You made me mad. I'm not showing up the next one. So, all right. But Dan will still be here, so you can listen to the whole thing. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Podcastersroundtable.com/guest. Sign up. Appear on the roundtable. Or just, find us on YouTube, podcasterroundtable.com, youtube.com/podcasterroundtable. I probably indicated that we were stopping, so no one's hearing that. If
They're gone.
So it's okay. I could probably...
We've lost them already.
I could probably say a lot of things right now that no one will ever hear. But thank you. If you're here, you are the power listener, and we appreciate you. Wave goodbye. We're out of here.